How's it going, everybody? This is Mike, and I'm here to do my top five Universal horror films, which a lot of my friends are doing in order to anticipate Halloween. All right, so coming in at number five, I chose The Son of Dracula. Okay, Son of Dracula, which is on this nice double feature with Dracula's daughter. Son of Dracula came out in 1943, directed by Robert Siodmak, a very talented director, and starred Lon Chaney as Dracula, also Louise Albritton, Evelyn Eggers, Frank Craven, a whole bunch of other people. Very good movie. Now, I'm not picking this because it is one of the best Universal films, but because I have a very strong emotional attachment to it. And that's because this is the very first Universal horror film I ever watched. I think it was around, it had to be around 1960, 1959. I was very, very young. And it's the first time I was allowed to stay up and watch a horror movie on TV. So that's where it all started for me. And if you've seen this, when they do the opening credits, they have the screen is covered with this big massive cobwebs, right? And these withered hands come up. I look like withered hands, or wearing gloves or something, to wipe all the cobwebs away. And then you see the title, Son of Dracula. I was hooked from that moment on. I will never forget how that made me feel. It was wonderful. Good movie. Lon Chaney Jr., in a way, he's the only drawback to the movie because he's not, to me, he's just not a very good Dracula. Great actor, great guy. You have to hand it to Lon Chaney. He did whatever Universal told him to do. Put on 400 pounds of makeup and be Frankenstein. Put on 500 pounds of makeup and be the Mummy. He did all of it. The Wolfman, very good actor, very, very decent guy. But he's just really not Dracula. But he does his best. Great atmosphere, great cinematography. It takes place in the South at an old plantation called Dark Oaks, and you've got that swampy atmosphere and lots of rolling fog and all that, which Universal was so good at in the 1940s. So, okay, that's my number five. My number four, this is another one that I have an emotional attachment to. In this wonderful legacy of the Mummy series, I'm choosing The Mummy's Hand from 1940, which was the first follow-up, won't really call it a sequel, but the first follow-up to the original 1933 Boris Karloff film, The Mummy, which is a true classic. The Mummy's Hand, they took the story in a different place. They changed the name of the mummy from Imhotep to Karis. They changed the name of the princess Ankhesenamun to Ananka, I guess because it was easier to pronounce or something. I don't know. But I've always loved this movie. Stars Dick Foran, Peggy Moran, Wallace Ford, and Tom Tyler, who was a kind of an action hero type of the era as the Mummy. And okay, so my reason for choosing this, it is a great film. It's a combination of adventure, lots of comedy, and then you have the horror aspect which comes in. Also has George Zucco, Eduardo Cianelli, a couple of great character actors. And I'm picking this because this is the first Universal horror film. In fact, the first horror film at all that I ever watched completely on my own in a room by myself in the dark. When I was growing up, this had to be the early 1960s, and the house I grew up in had a basement, and my parents had an old Admiral black and white TV. One of those things, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, one of these things made out of black metal, right? And it had maybe a 17 or 19-inch screen or something like that. But I remember one night very late that I went down to the basement and watched this movie completely by myself. And I will never forget how it felt when the mummy who was lying on a slab suddenly opened his eyes and came to life and sat up. I will never forget how I felt when that happened. It's just one of those things that just never leaves your memory. So great childhood memory with The Mummy's Hand. All right. Coming in at number three, this is one that a lot of people don't talk about very often. From 1932, this is The Old Dark House. The Old Dark House, directed by James Whale, stars Boris Karloff. Who else is in it? It's got Charles Laughton, Melvin Douglas, Gloria Stewart, Raymond Massey. Great bunch of actors, most of them British. Now, this is one of the first, in the talking era, one of the first old dark house films. You know, people going into a creepy old mansion and all kinds of terrible things happening. This is a very well-directed and very well-written film. It has witty dialogue. A lot of it's very funny. Ernest Thesiger is also in this. You remember him from The Bride of Frankenstein. James Whale is a great director, great cinematography, very creepy stuff. Boris Karloff is top billed. He's really not the star of the film, but he again is playing, a horrific part, and that's pretty much where the horror comes from. Is Karloff and maybe a couple of the other character actors. But The Old Dark House, very, very good movie. If you have not seen this, please check it out. Okay? Now, coming in at number 2 and number 1, these are kind of interchangeable for me, and I'm picking these because they are absolute classics. Dracula and Frankenstein, the original, 1931. This came first, Dracula. That's where the whole cycle began, then quickly followed by Frankenstein. And I just love both of these movies so much. Now, Dracula was directed by Todd Browning. Of course, it starred the unbelievably charismatic Bela Lugosi. And for me, Bela Lugosi will always be the personification of Dracula. And I can see now that this movie has a lot of flaws. It's very stagey. It gets very slow after the first half. And the thing is that whenever Lugosi is on the screen, or his supporting actor Dwight Frye, the movie comes to life, which is the strangest thing to say when you're talking about Dracula. But yeah, Lugosi is just so good. And for me, the opening sequence where Dwight Frye is in Dracula's castle and he's looking up at this immense staircase covered with spider webs, and Dracula comes walking slowly down the steps with a candelabra and stops and says, "I am Dracula." For me, that sequence and what follows for the next several minutes, that is the entire film. And if you just had that and nothing else, it would be an enduring classic. So I love this film very much. Like I said in my response to Patty Moran's video where he talked about Dracula, I tend to put this up on a pedestal someplace as something that for me is untouchable. And I even though I can see that it has flaws as a film, it's still a great classic film, and it is, again, where it all started. But Frankenstein, as James Higgins said the other night in his video, this is probably one of the most perfect films ever made, horror or otherwise. Directed by James Whale, a brilliant director, and Boris Karloff. I mean, my God, he could make this horrific-looking monster into a sympathetic character. I mean, few actors would be able to do that. Just a fantastic film all the way around. Yeah, Frankenstein, 1931. So those are my top 5 Universal horror films, and you can make comments, start arguments, anything you want to do, and I will listen. Take care.